So we are live streaming the event now. So welcome back, everyone. Happy 2023. I hope you're all doing well. And for people who are joining in from the United States, I see a lot of representation from different parts of the United States, Florida, Connecticut, Nashville, etc., and also people from the globe. We see people from Amsterdam and other places. So it's always a pleasure to have you back at the QuantUniversity Guest Lecture series. As you know, we have been focused on some of the frontier topics in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the pragmatic adoption of these technologies and methods in various industries. And the last year or so, we had multiple speakers talk about aspects of risks, wherein which we are looking at novel risks coming into the field, and how does that gel with some of the regulatory efforts? How does it gel with some of the things which, as we start adopting these tools, what does it make? How does it make sense to kind of focus on making sure that you're embedding the whole risk and the various associated monitoring and compliance and governance aspects as you're building out the machinery, as we move out from just designing processes and designing conference papers and things like that to pragmatic applications of these technologies. So in this realm, we have a new law coming up in New York. It's the NYC Bias Audit law. And as most of you know, this law, which was supposed to go in effect early this year, has been moved to April the 23rd. And I've been discussing with various practitioners, auditors, some academics, and also legal experts on what does this law mean. And we had Nick Schmidt, who gave a talk a few weeks ago, and Susie Surelli from Flaster Greenberg. So it's a tongue twister for me, Flaster Greenberg. So from Flaster Greenberg, so has joined us today to discuss the law. And as most of you know, there is a call with the New York regulatory body next week on January the 23rd. So as we prep towards the call and also the rollout of this legislation in the next few months, we thought we'll have a session to briefly discuss about what this law entails and have two perspectives. One is just kind of think about the technical aspects and what does it mean to basically, do these calculations and metrics which the law expects, and also get a legal perspective and an operational and administrative and compliance perspective on what does it mean to basically comply to this particular legislation, and who in an organization needs to be aware about all these aspects, and what does it mean to basically plan and operationalize this from various perspectives. What if you are a vendor and you are building these tools? What if you're a company based out of New York and you are going to be hiring people using some of these tools? What if you're an auditor and you plan to audit various companies and tool vendors and make sure that you are aware of what the expectations are as per this law? So with that, I would like to start today's session. So let me do a quick screen share. So the way we're going to do this session, I'm going to have a brief introduction to me and Susie. And then the first 15 to 20 minutes or so, I'm just going to give you a debrief of what the law expects with some examples. And then we will switch over to Susie, who's going to give a legal perspective of what this law means. Okay. And administrative aspects. So if you have any questions, please use the question answer panel in your window. That way you'll be able to communicate with us. And the last 10 to 15 minutes or so, we'll take those questions and we'll address them. Okay. So let me share my screen. And I presume the audio is okay, Susie?
Yes. I would just like to make one correction. The law goes into effect April 15th, not April 23rd.
Yeah, I know. I'm getting confused with January 23rd, when that is when the call happens, and then April 15th is when the law goes into effect. Thank you for the correction.
Oh yeah, 100%. We're working together.
Absolutely. Perfect. So, okay. So what does this law entail? And most of you have an understanding of what algorithmic auditing is, but I'm going to give you in today's session, a brief introduction to what our algorithmic auditing is, and then we'll focus most on the session on primarily the New York AI Bias Audit law. Okay, so for people who are getting to know us for the first time, my name is Sri Krishnamurthy, and I run a company called QuantUniversity. We are based out of Boston. We primarily focus on the intersection of data science, machine learning, finance, and we look at some of the aspects of risks associated with some of these frontier areas, primarily in artificial intelligence and data science. And in my past life, I've worked at companies like MathWorks, Citigroup, and Endeca, focusing mainly on building and consulting on various artificial intelligence and analytical systems. And most of you are aware and connected with me on LinkedIn. And as many of you know, we are working on a book on artificial intelligence risk management. So if you have any ideas or thoughts about some of the case studies or examples which needs to be included, please feel free to get in touch with me. That way I can kind of factor them as I'm building out this book. And as also mentioned early in the call, I also teach at Northeastern University, primarily in the master's program in information systems, and also looking at some of the emerging risks which are coming up in the fintech area, which is probably a discussion for another day. Okay, so as I mentioned, our company focuses primarily on aspects of how do we educate the workforce on some of the novel concepts and also some of the aspects which needs to be thought about as you operationalize practices. And in this realm, we have a lot of educational courses, and we power them through a hands-on learning environment called as the Q Sandbox. And QuantUniversity.com has the listing of all the courses which we offer. We do offer live courses in partnership with Premier and the CFA Institute, but we also have a lot of on-demand courses, and people from more than 15 countries have taken these courses, and you should be able to check out our website to see what the current course offerings. And we are also building out the algorithmic audit practice. So as we kind of focus on expanding the horizon of the possibilities of adopting these technologies, what does it mean to implement these? And we'll be able to happily discuss these things if you're interested, and also see if our services could be leveraged in your company. Okay, so today's discussion, as I mentioned, we'll do a joint session with Susie. And Susie is the shareholder and an attorney at Plaster Greenberg in the labor and employment practice. So Susie, I'll pause here for a second, and I'll let you introduce yourself.
Great, thanks, Rick. And actually, and I hate to correct you again, my last name is Cirilli. It's Cirilli.
I'm so sorry. I made a mistake again. Sorry about that. Yeah.
It's all good. It's all good. And I'll throw my info in the chat at some point. But yeah, so I'm a shareholder at Plaster Greenberg. My bread and butter is labor and employment management side, consulting with companies on how to handle employee issues. And in light of the New York, I might refer to it as Law 144, just to, instead of saying the NYC Bias AI Law, or whatever. But anyway, so in light of local Law 144, we've, our clients can't turn away from AI and machine learning and the potential disparate or discriminatory effects or impacts of these tools. So it's been a really exciting time for me and my team to kind of get into this and get in the forefront of it and help both employers and vendors and developers of these tools. So yeah, so I'm based out of Philadelphia, New York, and we're a boutique type firm with about 75 attorneys. We're full service, and we serve everywhere. So I'm happy to be here. And Sri, thanks for being a nerd about this as well. And it's been really fun to work with people in this space.
Absolutely. And, Susie and I, we met a couple of weeks ago here in Boston, and we had a great discussion. And that's how this whole session came about. We thought we'll have an educational session, just kind of, highlighting some of the key elements of the law, and also kind of slicing and dicing, if you will, on what does it mean. And as most of you who read this law and some of the comments which are out there realize that, this is new charter, we are chartering new territory in here. And there are going to be a lot more open questions. And one of the goals for this session is to just kind of, invoke the discussion in the community, if you will, to just make sure that we are all on the same page as we go into enforcement of this new law. Okay, so let me just kind of give you the big picture of what an algorithmic audit is, and then I'm going to like frame the discussion from an algorithmic auditor's perspective. I mean, as I mentioned, we as an algorithmic auditor kind of look at various aspects of an algorithm, work with companies, and work with various clients who are interested in getting an independent third-party perspective of what the tools are actually doing. And even before this particular law came out, the finance industry has formalized the field of model risk management. So audit is an integral piece of most model governance systems which are there in industries. And typically, an audit could be an internal function or an external function. And depending on the client and the requirements, depending on what the goal is, the audit could be scoped. And today, when you ask someone what an algorithmic auditor does, so this is kind of the answer we typically get. And this is the picture of the proverbial elephant, if you will, and the blind man. And depending on your expertise and your skill sets, you would probably be thinking about your algorithmic audit based on the background and experience in the industry and the domain you come from. And that's what's happening in today's day and age, because we do not have a formal definition of what an algorithmic audit is. And then many times we see different experts coming from their own interpretation of what an audit should look like. So the more clarity we get with respect to the expectations, especially when it comes down to expecting a whole city and all the employers to be following a particular protocol, the more it becomes important for us to kind of standardize on certain things. Now, when we think about an algorithmic audit, and this is just a general definition, if you will, so we kind of frame it as a structured process, which could be either conducted internally or externally. I'll kind of define what an independent third party means. And typically, if it's done internally, then you would want to make sure that the model developer is not doing the auditing. You'll have another knowledgeable group which is actually doing the audit, but you could also have an audit done by a qualified independent third party. And depending on the use case, there are some of the examples in here. So it could be verifying or validating the working of an algorithm along with other aspects, because typically you won't take a Jupyter notebook and say, this is the model. You will have a lot of various components like the data, the environment in its working, what processes are involved, who's going to be using it, what use cases are accomplished, et cetera, et cetera. And contextualizing all these aspects, you would be building out the mechanism for an algorithmic audit. In addition to that, there may be various facets that need to be potentially looked at. And some of these facets could be things like discrimination, bias, explainability, interpretability, privacy, security, et cetera, et cetera. So depending on what you are focusing on, you would scope an audit so that you could basically say what the role of the audit is, what components will be audited, and what aspects and facets of the audit would be potentially looked at. And then finally, you'll be having things like documentation of the algorithm's behavior. Is it working as intended? And who's actually validating these claims and who are making these claims. So that all needs to be looked at. And then typically there would be recommendations for mitigation, control, and elimination. And that's an open question with respect to this law, because there are requirements which have been stated with respect to what the audit requires, but the specifics of what happens of an audit, are you just going to publish a report out, or do you need to have some kind of a plan for mitigation and control that needs to be done? And typically, if it's like an audit wherein you're looking at a particular conformance to a specification and you have certain metrics or certain goals, and if the model doesn't meet those specific goals, you'd potentially have a plan of action to kind of control and mitigate. But those are to be determined in this particular case. Now, with respect to the legislation, and most of you have been exposed to some of these upcoming draft legislative efforts, and also some of the proposal or the blueprints, if you will, which are coming out. And I've just summarized a couple of them, which you should probably all aware of about. But there are a lot more which are coming, and I know Susie has a couple of other ones which she'll be talking about when she talks about the New York Bias Law and other efforts. But primarily, there have been national and international efforts focusing on what adoption of AI means. I've been, involved with some of the efforts, but the EU law obviously is definitely something which is very rich and which is very diverse in terms of the purview of applications which are going to be targeted, and you should definitely look into it. Obviously, the NIST has the AI risk management framework, and we have the 1.0 version, which is being formally released on January 26th, which is going to be happening very soon. And you all are probably all aware about the White House efforts on the AI Bill of Rights, which is the blueprint has come out in the last few months. Now, with all this said, there have been a lot of local efforts or distributed efforts to kind of bring in some of the legislative aspects in various governments and sectors. And the one which I think is the most important one in the United States at least is, and everybody's having an eye on looking at like, what does this law look like as this law gets enforced within the United States in a major city, and what does it mean for other various cities where they're going to be doing their own thing or expect federal laws to kind of apply to various jurisdictions, if you will. So let's kind of focus on this, the New York bias law, and I'm just going to briefly summarize the things which are already there in the reference which we posted, and we'll also post it again if you want to read the various documents which have been published already. And I would also highly recommend you to read some of the comments, because I got educated a lot when kind of going back to the elephant picture, if you will. I kind of have a background as a technologist, and I kind of come from a perspective of what are the calculations, how do we potentially do various technical audits, if you will. But I was also fascinated to kind of see other people's perspective who have backgrounds and experiences in various fronts. Now, this particular law, so if you are a company and you are planning to hire people, and typically what happens is you have resumes, you potentially have various publications of what the job entails, and then you have people applying for these jobs. And what used to happen was people would just basically filter the resumes and then focus on the people who the employers would be interested in interviewing, and the interviews would happen, and then people would be selected for the jobs. But as you all can imagine, in today's day and age, when we are working in remote environments, we are working with a whole pool of potential applications or applicants coming from various channels and sources. It's becoming a huge issue for employers to filter out these resumes and to focus on the right resumes. And that's where a lot of tools have been invented, and many of them use data and artificial intelligence technologies to help you with various facets on how do you filter out the resumes, how do you expedite the interviewing process, how do you score various resumes, that way you can potentially filter based on the criteria of your choice. And this is also leading to the concern of how these tools are actually being trained, what data was actually used to construct these tools, and whether there are inherent biases which are there in your processes as you use these tools, or in the tools themselves, which you are potentially using. And that basically could be kind of, percolating throughout your process. And the law basically says, well, in the spirit of making sure that you're not doing something illegal is one thing, but then also to make sure that you're aware what's actually happening when you use these processes, you are expected to go through a bias audit. And the time frame, because the law is just being released now, the time frame is within 1 year of the law. And then the results of your bias audit should be made publicly available, and certain notices should be made available for employees and various job candidates. So that's kind of the big summary of what this particular law entails. And I kind of see this particular law in two buckets. One is the technical aspects of what needs to be done, because there's some calculations and examples, and I'll kind of share some of these terms in a little bit. And then there are a lot of compliance and operational and administrative requirements as per what needs to be done. How long are you going to be maintaining records? Where are you going to be publishing? Who are you going to be selecting for doing these audits, et cetera, et cetera. So those components should also be addressed. And let me start with the first segment. Now, There is a whole area of what machine learning and statistical tools means and what does automation mean. And the documentation which you can potentially find on websites will talk about like what does this particular law entail. But primarily, they are kind of focusing on computational processes, which derived from machine learning, statistical modeling, analytics, and AI. So this is a very broad definition of what these tools mean, but primarily for scoring, classification, recommendation, which is primarily to make sure that when you're doing employment decisions, which would impact people, how will either you're augmenting your current process or you're replacing your existing process by using this tool. So that's kind of the umbrella of what this AEDT or automated employment decision tools actually mean. So here, it also clarifies that this AEDT does not include a tool that does not automate, support, or substantially assist or replace discretionary decision-making process, and that does not materially impact natural processes, etc. So there is also the filtering criteria of what is in the purview of this particular law and what are the ones which you should not be thinking about. So when it comes down to using firewalls and databases and spreadsheets, etc., you can potentially say, I don't need to audit all those things, if you will. Okay, so there are some clarifications on what this law actually means. And let's focus on this bias audit. So this basically is the term, and I'm just kind of pulling information from the published documents because we have very little clarity at this point, and I don't want to like deviate with interpretations before we clearly understand what's actually published. So I'm just sticking to what's been published out there. So it means an impartial evaluation by an independent auditor, and that shall include, but not limited to, the testing of an automated employment decision tool to assess the tool's disparate impact on persons of any component one category required to be reported by employers pursuant of this particular law, as specified by this code of federal regulation. So you can actually, and Susie can direct you to where to find these specifics, if you will. But my primary keywords which I would take away are impartial evaluation by an independent auditor, and then it should include, but not just limited to, the testing of automated tools to assess the tool's disparate impact. Okay, so what does an independent auditor mean? And this is where I think there's a whole profession evolving, if you will. Most consulting companies now are also getting into independent audits. And back in the day, we had model risk validators, wherein we had the statistical and the computational skills, if you will, and we would go into financial institutions and insurance companies, basically validating their models. But as the field of usage of these tools have expanded beyond just finance, now the role of an independent auditor is becoming more and more concretely drawn, if you will. But again, for this particular law, at least, there are some clarifications on what the independent auditor should be. So here they specifically say you should not be involved in building and distributing the tool. You should not have an employment relationship with an agency which seeks to use or continue to use this tool. So it's just basically making sure that there's arm's length distance between you as an independent auditor, and if you have any kind of influence, if you will, with either the tool developer or with the employment agency. And also they talk about interests with respect to material, direct and indirect. So this is basically kind of defining the role of an auditor, if you will. It doesn't clearly talk about the skills you should have in order to audit a particular algorithm. And that becomes interesting from my perspective, because you could still meet the criteria of what is expected in here, and you could just go in claiming that I'm an independent auditor, but doesn't really give you the context or the skills, if you will, to audit it. And that's where we have built out a whole program for the algorithmic auditing course, wherein we talk about like the skills which are required in order for you to become an auditor. There are also perspectives. I mean, you could potentially get an academic to potentially, become an auditor for a particular algorithm, or you could have a consulting company, who have trained auditors who could do that, or you could have subject matter experts. And that area is, as I said, is, slowly evolving, and hopefully in the next few years, we'll have more concrete definitions and certifications of what an auditor would potentially mean. But at this particular time, it's still very nebulous. Now let's get into a couple of technical terms, just in the interest of discussing some of the examples in here before I hand over the stage to Susie. So there are 2 or 3 terms which are defined and given examples for multiple times, and I'm just going to go through a couple of examples in here just to give you an idea of what kinds of things are we going to look at when we actually do an audit. So there's obviously the selection rate. So it is the rate at which individuals in a category are either selected to move forward in a hiring process. So you get 100 resumes, and let's say 60 of them are male, 40 of them are female. So, and then you do a selection. What percentage of males did you select? What percentage of females did you select? That's as simple as that, selection. You don't need, rocket science or artificial intelligence algorithms to do it. An Excel sheet should be fine. So this is a very simplistic, way of kind of looking at it. But then there is what's called as an impact ratio, which is the selection rate for a particular criteria divided by the selection rate for the most selected criteria. So this is where it starts getting a little more interesting. So there are 2 examples which are being disclosed in this particular paper, the comment document, and I'll just kind of go through those 2 examples. So here, an employer wants to use an AEDT to screen resumes and schedule interviews for job posting. To do so, an employer must ensure that the bias audit of the AEDT was conducted no more than a year prior to the planned use of the AEDT. The employer asks the vendor for a bias audit. The vendor provides historical data regarding applicant selection that the vendor has collected from multiple employers to an independent auditor who will conduct a bias audit as follows. Now, this is one example, just to give you an illustration of the kinds of things that will be involved in an audit. But me, as an auditor, have so many questions. There are so many use cases, and you cannot just articulate all the use cases, if you will, in here, because believe me, like when you are using tools, you won't just go with a perspective that I'm going to be doing a particular thing. You may have so many criteria on why you would be using the tools. You may be kind of having the human in the loop, where a human may say, you know what, I need someone with Python skills and who has worked with these particular libraries in this particular setting for these kinds of applications. I'm not sure, by just doing specifics, you could potentially accomplish all those. So it's still TBD on how you could potentially, include all those criteria through an audit in terms of use cases, definitions, and looking at audits for particular criteria. But let's kind of stick to the disclosed examples, if you will. As I mentioned, so if we just take simple examples, so there were so many applicants in here, so many people were selected to move forward. And then when you look at the selection rate, you had 48% who were male and 47% who were female. So you basically take this as for the calculation of the impact ratio, the most selected category in this particular case is the male. So you get an impact ratio of 1, and then for female, it will be 0.979. But then you can kind of expand the same thought process to various race and ethnicity categories. So here you could see all the various races and ethnicities, and that's where you kind of expand that. You get the selection rate. So here you can see that the white, not Hispanic, and Latino was the most selected, 52%. So that's where this becomes 1. And then you can kind of look at the other impact ratios in here. Okay, so similar, you can kind of incorporate the intersections, Latino, Hispanic or Latino, non-Hispanic or Latino, male, female, and then you could have male, female, et cetera, et cetera. You could kind of, slice and dice. Anybody who has used Tableau or any other tool, you could potentially think about like, okay, how do we kind of structure the data and how do we calculate these particular ratios? As simple as that. So here, the audit basically gives you a couple of criteria. When an AEDT scores candidates for employment or employees being considered for promotion, you should have at a minimum the median score, scoring rate, impact ratio, and then you have to basically include these impact on AEDT on these particular criteria. So that's the amount of clarity we have at this point. And then just to give you an idea, the impact ratio, you have like 2 formal definitions. The first one was what I illustrated. The second one is you calculate the scoring rate, which is the rate at which individuals in a category receive a score above a sample's median score, where the score was calculated by the AEDT. And then the impact ratio is, you have the scoring rate for a category divided by the scoring rate for the highest scoring category. Very similar interpretations like what we saw before. In here, we basically, look at another example wherein an employer uses AEDT to score applicants for culture fit. To do so, an employer must ensure that the bias audit was conducted no more than in a year. And they provide, historical data on culture fit. And then you basically calculate. So here, the scoring rate for male was 54.3. That's why the impact ratio becomes 1 here, and then female it becomes 0.82. And then because it explicitly says in here that you have to look at sex categories, race, ethnicity, and categories and intersectional categories. So you kind of do similar calculations in here. And then this is what I can see for race and ethnicity. And these are the intersectional categories. So the summary is the math is very simple. You can easily do it. But the question is, in what context? What are the various use cases? So that's not clearly, completely available for me. And I'm very curious to see what Susie has to say about this. And then some of the data requirements they talk about, you could have a 5% startup, or you could have 10,000 people in a company. So what does it mean when you kind of, think about different categories of employers, if you will? And then how do you work with test data? And then if you're using multiple agencies and the agencies are doing the filtering for you, what does it mean? So there are a lot of different questions which are still outstanding. And there's a requirement specifically on, how do you disclose what is being done and how do you publish it? And then this is an administrative aspect. So how do you need to publish things? How can you potentially go to a website and find out the various results with respective dates, and where can you, get that access information? And then how long should the records be retained and made available? Again, those are administrative aspects. So the key summary is, you have a bunch of calculations to be done and an audit that needs to be done with through an independent third-party auditor. And then the question becomes, what if you get all your results, and what does it mean? Do you publish the results as is? What in case you observe problems? What in case you don't have data? What in case you are partially responsible to do certain things and you have delegated other things to other agencies? There are a lot of questions. So that's why there is a hearing happening, and we saw a lot of comments come through from vendors, from academics, from practitioners, from auditors, from companies who are potentially going to be affected. And that's why we saw like 2 calls. And I think the date was supposed to be early January, but then, as Susie was mentioning, it was being moved to April 15th. And there's a call which is going to happen next week on Monday to basically extend the discussion and get more clarification on what this proposed rules actually mean. So if you're interested in continuing the conversation, you should definitely come to this particular call. And in addition to that, if you are interested in submitting comments, there is a website, and there is also a link wherein you can potentially go and submit your potential comments. So this is the reference I was kind of talking about. And as I mentioned, there are still a lot of open questions on what AI vendors need to know, and what should companies in NYC need to know, and what should employees and prospects need to know, and what do auditors, AI auditors, if you will, need to know. So we are primarily looking at from an educational perspective at this point, and we are creating, as most of you know, QuantUniversity has an algorithmic auditing course, and we partner with the Premier, which is the Professional Risk Managers organization, to make that course available. And we are creating a new edition, the NYC Bias Law Edition, so that we can factor in some of the key requirements of this particular law, and we can also answer some of the questions which are still outstanding. So we are constantly in tune with what's actually happening with respect to the law. So the course is not fully done yet. We are still in the process of building it out, and we are waiting for the rollout to happen so that companies can accurately prepare for what is expected from this particular. So if you are interested in taking this course, there is the QR code in here, and it'll also be available for participants through a link which will be emailed out. So please stay tuned. So with that said, I'm going to take a pause in here now that you're familiar with what the law expects. So I would like to now invite Susie to the virtual stage so that she can continue the discussion on what does it mean from a legal perspective.
So yeah, thank you, Shri. And I got to tell you, it's, I'm really excited because usually I'm speaking with with companies, HR people, and the last 6 months it's been a lot of people in the machine learning and AI space. So I welcome, I'd love to connect with, I welcome the opportunity to speak with you all to kind of give you my side of the story and what we're dealing with. And I think what we are seeing is a gap in between the worlds of AI, machine learning, the developers, the vendors, and HR operations. And then there's people like Shri and me in the middle trying to figure out how we can all translate this and get this, at least comply with this law. And ultimately, not to be too pie in the sky or hunky-dory about it, but the intent of this law is to mitigate discrimination. And back in the day meaning 6 months ago, or maybe a couple of years ago rather, you'd have an HR director and a team of recruiters, right? And we'd have to monitor their bias. They're human beings, right? And so what we're learning is these tools have bias. And so we just have to take our skills that we've been using. This is what I've been telling my clients, that this isn't that scary. This isn't all space age stuff. It's just the skills we've been using with the people we have to now apply to these tools that we're using. So I'm going to do a 60,000 foot view over my read of the law. I did not touch the impact ratios and anything with a math or like a number. I mean, sorry, or a phrase with a line and then another phrase. I don't do fractions. So I went to law school for a reason. And I also do have 3 pretty in-depth blogs on my take, and not my take, but the employment lawyer's take on the law that I can send to Shri, and Shri, you can pump them out to people if you want. I think they are kind of helpful as you all maybe market your services to clients. So real quick, who does this law apply to? It applies to New Yorkers for sure, right? Employers in New York, but there is a notice requirement that I'll get to later on that requires notice to residents in New York. And I do think I saw a question relating to remote workers. If you are in, say, Tennessee or Seattle and you're recruiting a worker in New York, are you required to provide that person notice that you're using an AEDT? An AEDT is automated employment decision-making tool. I might call it an AI tool for the just purposes of ease, and I'm from Philly and my accent might come out. But so there's a lot of questions, so I'll get to that. So real quick, what triggers the application? You all might be speaking with employers or companies or lawyers that might say, my clients or I don't use any of these tools. But it's important that we know what these tools are, because this applies to most companies are utilizing some sort of AI or machine learning. Someone referenced LinkedIn in a question. And just to clarify, LinkedIn would not have to publish these results of any audit, but an employer, let's say QuantUniversity, is using LinkedIn to hire their people, is using some type of tool through LinkedIn. The LinkedIn is the tool. QuantUniversity would have to publish the results of the use of that tool. And so real quick, and I know Shri mentioned this, so entities who are using an AEDT, it's any machine learning, statistical modeling, or AI that issues a simplified output, a score, classification, or recommendation for promotion or hire. So this also applies to internal promotions within a company. And now here's the lawyer in me, right? It's if you're using these tools to substantially assist or replace discretionary decision-making employment decisions. The lawyer in me is always thinking about litigation that's coming down the pike, and we don't know what the phrase substantially assist means. The conservative in me and the good practitioner is saying, if you use these, you better get an audit. And so if you're speaking with people and you're wondering, I'm using LinkedIn, that's not a tool. Well, it could be. There's also little chatbot softwares. I don't know if it's called chatbot, but that spits out communications, text messages, emails to potential candidates saying, where did you go to school, or how much schooling, how much experience? There's resume apps that sift through for code words or specific buzzwords that the employer wants to see. There's even gamified tests that are coming out now to test things like communication styles, leadership styles, memory even. So any of these tools that are being used, you better get an audit. Real quick, Shri mentioned what a bias audit actually is. I want to focus on the independence of the auditor. And this is where the proposed regs are clear. Now, if they're passed as is, an auditor cannot be involved in the use, development, or distribution of the tool. So you have to be completely, and I'm sure maybe in the financial industry, you're all used to this, but we're HR folks, we're just getting into it. So the auditor cannot have an employment relationship with the employer or the vendor, the vendor of the AI tool. And then next, the auditor cannot have any financial interest, direct or material, with the employer or the vendor. So we have to make sure that our contracts, whether you're an auditor, a vendor, or the customer, so the customer is the employer, we'll say, customers need to make sure that whatever auditor they're using in that contract, there's a representation and a guarantee that this auditor is independent as defined by the New York Local Law 144. And I would list out what that means, that I, Susie Auditor, have no employment relationship with the AI tool, financial interest, material, or direct, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this is what's fun and also a major headache for all of us, the auditors, the vendors, and the customers. It's, well, we have to disclose to the auditor, here's the tool we're using. So what if you guys have consulted with, and I'm saying you all, meaning if you're in audit, it seems to be you're interested in auditing if you're on this course. What if you are consulting with one vendor that developed an app? That's fine. You just can't audit that app, that tool. So make sure your contracts, your service agreements, your independent contractor agreements protect you as the auditor to protects your independence. Okay, so that's that. The next thing is the categories of the audit that Shri mentioned, correctly so. This is a simple one. It's basically the stuff that's on EEO-1 form. So if you all worked for a company with 100 or more employees, you have to fill out a form, or you don't have to, but it's a voluntary self-identification. And it really is just gender, ethnicity, and race. So that's all that this law is auditing: discrimination based on gender, race, and ethnicity. Here's the thing that I want to, it's good news for you all if you're thinking of doing audits, because the EEOC is just issued their strategic enforcement plan. The EEOC, by the way, is the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission that sets out that here's charges of discrimination. Now, real quick, in order to bring a claim of discrimination against your employer, you have to file what is a charge of discrimination first with the EEOC. You have to exhaust your administrative remedies. I'm just going to stick to the federal stuff and not the specific state stuff. But here's why the EEOC matters to you, the auditor, and these AI tool developers. Because the EEOC is issued their strategic enforcement plan that said they are focusing on disparate impact and discriminatory effects of AI tools. Specifically, right now, this last year, they issued a guidance on the Americans with Disabilities Act. So what I'm telling you all is that these tools right now, this law only focuses on race, gender, ethnicity. But I'm telling you, the EEOC is heating out alarms that we are going to look to see how they discriminate against people with disabilities. And they do. And it's very easy ways to do it. Not easy ways to do it, but it's easy for, someone if it's a test and it's keystrokes. Well, what if someone has dexterity issues or only has one hand? Just trying to use an example that's pretty obvious. That person's not going to have the best keystrokes, right? And they may then not make it to the next round of the hiring process or the promotion process. So what do you have to do? Do a reasonable accommodation. Anyway, I'm kind of going on a tangent. What I'm telling you is this is just the beginning. And these are not the EEO-1 form and the components that this local law is making us audit. It's just the tip of the iceberg with the areas of discrimination. So what I tell you all is auditors need to be well-versed in what's being tested, or what these employers are being held to, the standard that we're being held to. And then the employers need to also know that the capabilities of these tools that they're using. So we really just need a lot of dialogue between the three of us: auditors, AI developers, and the customers. What was the next thing? Okay, so this applies to hiring and promotion. And then Shri mentioned the results, and this is where you all come in. According to this law, the results has to be published, and you publish the most recent bias audit, and it has to include a summary of the results. And a summary of the results under the proposed reg says that you have to disclose the source and include an explanation of the data that includes the selection rate and impact ratios for these categories. And then you have to also include the distribution date of the AEDT. This needs to be on your website. This needs to be, and you need to maintain, you meaning the customers need to maintain these for 6 months. I would say you all should also retain those for your customers, so they have those for the employers. The next piece that's really not your problem, you meaning auditors, but more to my clients, is that you have to send notice to candidates and employees that you are using this tool. And this is the kicker that I think all companies, whether you're in Washington, wherever everyone's from, some people are in Canada. Technically, according to this law, candidates residing in New York City must receive notice that if they're applying to a job or they're up for a promotion, that an AI tool is going to be used. And it has to be, and the notice needs to be clear and conspicuous on your website or on the job posting or on the internal promotion, within your company, that this tool will be used. And then it throws in principles of privacy, right? That it's going to explain that the data retention policy, the type of data that you're collecting from this tool, and the source of this tool. And then, as always with general stuff with privacy, is that you need to inform the individual of ways that they can also retrieve their own data from this tool. This is crazy because this could really open us up for some litigation. And what is discoverable in a lawsuit? So I see this as being kind of a fun year in quotes for all of us. And next, this tool cannot be used until there's been notice for 10 days prior to its use. That's not really your issue as auditors, but I'm not sure what communication you will have with customers or clients like mine, but that is part of the law. So the takeaways that I have from this is this: like, we're no longer in a vacuum. It used to be HR people, once it happens, once they hire people, if there's discrimination, a lawsuit comes after the fact. Now we all need to work together. Like, the vendors of these tools must contract. They have to be in touch with their customers. The customers, the onus is on them, because this is huge. If I'm a company, and if Shree's a company, how about that? And I'll stay the lawyer. Instead of, I was going to make you the lawyer, Shree, and me the company. But so say Shree uses Auditor A to use their tool, recruitment tool. Auditor A, I don't tell them what tool I'm using. Shree's been consulting with my recruitment tool. That invalidates the audit, and that invalidates everything we've done. And that is exposure to, are we discriminating? And probably a bucket full of subpoenas and data requests for what is actually being done at the company. On the flip side, the auditor needs to know the questions to ask this employer, to say, hey, what tools are you using? Keep us posted. And these contracts on both sides, the auditor and the vendor, need to have disclosure requirements. Let's say QuantUniversity merges with so-and-so. If they have an auditing arm, we got to make sure that we're not screwing around with the independent nature of these auditors. Things to think about. And I see this question about age, the elephant in the room. I'm having the time of my life as an academic and like a huge headache as a lawyer. As I mentioned, the EEOC issued their technical guidance on algorithms and machine learning and the impact on people with disabilities. Here's the thing. ADA, there's case law. Whenever there's a case of discrimination based on gender, religion, national origin, that's Title VII, right? ADA is disabilities. Age is the ADEA, Age Discrimination in Employment Act. They all follow the same burden shifting framework. So the EEOC is sending like a not so subtle signal that everyone better get ready, because if once there is exposure with the disability, we just need one charge that somebody was using a tool. Say Shri, you and I were talking at breakfast in Boston. Say there's a video facial recognition tool, and say I'm paralyzed on the left side of my face because I had a stroke or because of some other physical condition that I have. I'm not going to score as high, or maybe I have my eye contact is not the best. I'm going to score low, and that might prohibit me from moving forward in the process. You're done. That's discrimination, unless there was an accommodation offered. So to your question about another protected class, it's coming. That's why I think if you guys are in the auditing space, the world is your oyster at the moment. Because if you can, once you master how to do this law, it's just a matter of knowing the protected classes, maybe consulting with an attorney who knows what they're doing. And I'm not plugging for me, but plugging for, we all have to be working together on this. So I would say this is a fun time for all of us. And I'll end on this, and I welcome questions. I know we're at 1 o'clock. I try to condense all this. The issue of liability and what next. The EEOC has said that no matter who uses these, whatever vendor you use, the employer is on the hook for the impact of it. So if I'm a customer and I contract with QuantUniversity to use their tool, and it comes out that it completely discriminates against women. No women have been hired in years, right? Who's on the hook?
Build that.
Sorry?
You would never build that.
But who's on the hook? Is it Shri or is it me? And the answer is me. And a lot of my clients are like, that's completely unfair. We don't know anything about these tools. But it's the same thing as if we hired Shri, the person, to recruit my people. And if he only hires men under the Title VII and under the ADA, Shri's not personally liable. I am as the employer. So now we got to see it under the federal framework, as there's, from what we know so far, the employers are on the hook. The New York law is silent on that. So there could be ways to wiggle around contracting liability and indemnity and defense and all of that. And then the last piece, and then I will shut up, and I would love some questions, is what next? So say I have an audit done by one of you, and it's completely discriminatory. We're not getting everybody. What do? You give it back to me, the customer. Then do I have to go to the vendor and say, hey, we have to tweak this tool or tweak the algorithm to make sure that there's no impact? Can you, the auditor, communicate with the vendor? Who's paying for that service? Because you have to maintain your independence. So I think the audit is the first step, but then the next step about what we do after that is still a whole new world. So that's kind of all I have. Sorry if I spoke too fast or said too much, but I just kind of want to give you a hint of what's to come, and I'm happy to chat more informally, of course, about what this means and any questions you all have.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sudhi. That was very enlightening. And give me 1 second. I think I shared the wrong screen. Did I? Let's share proper screen. Okay, I think that's the right one. Perfect. I think there's one comment or question. So let me just see if I can.
Yeah, I'm not good at I just see the last one that popped up, but now I don't see anything. So if there's a question, I think I saw it. Something about diversity and inclusion?
Okay, let's see. Yeah, I think once it shares, it just does something interesting. So, okay, so there's a question. As far as I know, DI is not included in many AI tools. I think this would put a damper on employers to use this tool. Thoughts? Yeah, so I don't know if any tools have specifically made any claims on DI as in like diversity and inclusion. So it would be interesting to see how the tool landscape is going to evolve over the next few years, especially if there are legal requirements and also company-specific requirements. How do we factor in our aspects as we kind of make tool selection or versions of tools which factor in specific claims and have been certified by independent auditors to meet certain kinds of criteria. So that's a great point, Sanjay. Thank you for that. So Suli, I think we are running out of time. It's 1:04. So we were having a discussion whether we were going to be able to like fill in the whole hour. So it looks like we have filled in more than an hour, kind of having discussions. And thanks for all the discussion questions. And I know it's novel, and this is an area I think is we are kind of scratching the surface on what it actually means. And mind you, we don't have a clear definition on what the tools are going to entail. We are looking at it from a business process perspective, the hiring business process, and what does it mean to use in AEDT. And there are so many other, more formal ways in which you could kind of pose that question. But also looking at it from a 60,000-foot view, there are so many AI tools coming out. What does it mean from an auditor's perspective? What does it mean from a legal perspective? How do you typically look at individual requirements and kind of factor it from an enterprise organization? And who's going to bear the burden? Is it going to be the companies? Is it going to be the tool vendors? And what does it mean we as a society as we start building and using these tools? So a lot of open questions. Thank you so much for your time today, Susie. It was a real pleasure to kind of hear your thoughts on how you see the world and how you're interpreting the various legislations which are out there. We're going to continue the discussion. As I mentioned before, we are putting together a whole course on algorithmic auditing with a focus on NYC Bias Audit law. And we will stay in touch both through LinkedIn and other social media forums. And also, if you have signed up on our mailing list on QuantUniversity.com, we will be able to share some updates as the course becomes more concrete. Please stay tuned for future discussions on this topic as we kind of learn more. And we will be definitely tuned in for the session on January 23rd to see where some of the clarifications and questions are going to be answered by some of the legislators out there and the regulators who are going to be working with this law. So we'll close the session for today and hope you have a wonderful rest of the day and week, and we will continue to be in touch online. Take care. See you.
Thanks, Sheree.